one of the issues that we have when we're talking about health in general, disease in general, treating disease, and prohibiting disease, is anticipating things that will cause disease and prohibit them, is many of us have been educated to have what I call magical thinking. Okay? This is exactly the same kind of thinking I'm talking about when you have individuals that build their homes and businesses in floodplains at or below the level of the flood. In other words, they have signs in downtown that show the last flood. You know, it was 22 feet high, and you know it's 8 feet up on a building, and so they literally have signs like that show how high the water has gotten in the past, and people will build their buildings and put their businesses and their livelihoods and all this underwater because they don't see any water at that time. Nature is an immutable force. And what I mean by that is irresistible and immutable, that nature will be natural according to natural principles, and there's essentially nothing that human beings can do to change that. So for example, in Florida we have hurricanes. We're going to continue to have hurricanes. It's never not going to have hurricanes. All we can do is have better forecasting. And like we had to do a year or so ago, when we're 7 miles from the predicted eye of the hurricane, we beat feet and we evacuate. I had to evacuate. We had to close the school and evacuate because the I-75 over here went up I-75. That's not far, right? We didn't have magical thinking that we would be the only place in the path of this horrendous hurricane that didn't get trashed. Now, as it turns out, we only got slightly trashed. But just a couple of miles from us, there were people who were without power for 6 weeks after that. We were without power for 10 days. Okay? But there were neighbors who were without power for 6 weeks because then they were flooded and they were underwater and they were, it was really bad. Okay? Before we talk about the documentary, I want to say that this is an umbrella concept, is that most people, when it comes to predicting their health, have this idea of this magical thinking, just like the people who build their houses and businesses in the floodplain on the banks of the Mississippi River, and it never really occurs to them that the possibility that they're going to lose everything and lose it in a really bad way and quickly, that they think it's not going to happen to them. Or that it's not likely to happen to them. And remember, natural disaster, we call it. See, the thing is this flooding on the Mississippi, it's on the news, they're relating to it as a natural disaster, but it's not. It's not a natural disaster. It's springtime. In springtime, snow melts and it rains. And in springtime, the arteries of Mother Earth balloon and have more pressure than the rest of the year. It's the blood pressure of the earth is the volume of water that's flowing through the waterways. It's the blood pressure of the earth. It's not a natural disaster. It's the most natural thing in the world. Even the eastern woodlands and central woodlands, Native Americans who first taught American settlers how to build log homes along the Mississippi, because you might think that it was the Europeans who taught the Native Americans how to build houses, but you'd be wrong. Historically, you would be wrong. Okay? It was actually exactly the opposite. Native Americans always lived in houses, which, we colloquially call a log home, made from trees and so on. The Sioux, the 5 great Sioux nations, who we call the Plains Indians, and I was on the documentary and they always say the Plains Indians. Well, they're from Virginia and Minnesota. Virginia and Minnesota. That's where they're from. Have you ever been to Virginia? No? Who has not been to Virginia other than? Okay. Well, for those of us who've been to Virginia, if you drive into Virginia, what's one of the first things that you happen to notice in every direction as far as you can see? If you're, not just on the coast, but is the trees. Virginia is like far as the eye can see in every direction, everywhere you go from the south to the north of Virginia is nothing but forest and trees, right? Okay? Minnesota used to be covered with trees. Not as much now. You wouldn't have that impression. Why? Because the trees are cut down to build farms. But 150, 250, 350 years ago, all those areas where the dairy farms are and all that, that was forest. It was cut down. The trees were cut down to build it. So, but the Native Americans built log homes. And they did not build those log homes on the banks of the rivers. Why? Because they had determined a long time ago that logs float. Because they make canoes out of logs. They made boats out of logs. Like if you want to go somewhere on the river, you can hollow out a log and you can go and you can use it as a conveyance. So if you build your house out of logs in a place where it'll flood, every once in a while your house will become a canoe. And then you have to rebuild it. And certainly back in the days where the way that you acquired the logs that you built the log home from was like a beaver. You had to chew it down with your teeth. No, I mean, they had stone axes and things like that. But, to take a bunch of trees down to build a house. And how has anyone here ever participated in building a log house? All right, let me explain. A small log home, just what you would call a 1-bedroom with a living room and a little area for a kitchen or whatnot, it's going to take about 150 trees. Okay? So if all you have to take those trees down is your teeth and a stone axe, that's a lot of work. Right? Even if you and all the friends that you know or throw at it, right? That's a lot of work. And so you wouldn't do that and then build something out of that knowing that next year it's going to float away. And because, see, they didn't value real estate. In fact, Native Americans didn't have any such concept as real estate. So they didn't think that, lakefront property, riverfront property is more valuable than non, they would look at it logistically from, if it's an area that's going to flood, let's don't build there. Let's build in an area that doesn't flood. And how do you know if it's going to flood or not? You just look around. You just look around. You can see water line from past floods for thousands of years. So they just look around. We don't do that. We have magical thinking. We think because we can spend a lot of money or however much we spend to build a house in a floodplain, that it's not, if it floods, it's not going to flood us. Or if it does, we'll be able to throw up some sandbags. See, I was looking at the news this morning, a lot of people with sandbags in front of their doors, right? No, sandbags, it doesn't work. Where Rob lives, that's a frequent thing in the hurricanes. When it floods, they put sandbags up. Everybody gets into the sandbag thing, and they have sandbag brigades, and the city organizes sites where you can collect, sandbags, fill your own. You fill sandbags, that's fun. That's got to be a lot of fun. After about 2 or 3, not so much, but you need 200 or 300. You know, but it doesn't work. Actually, doesn't work. The water still gets through the sandbags, just not as much. You know. And they talk about never again. I'm out of here. I'm moving. You know. I'm out of here. I'm never again. You know. And then there's a couple of neighborhoods in South Tampa. They flood every year. Every single year. And the people there are just like, oh, it's horrible. Our house is just terrible. And they're wading in the street. And somebody should do something about this. It's an act of God. It's nature. They're in a floodplain, in a swamp. A floodplain in a swamp. And then after the water goes away from the flood, guess what happens? Then we have the sinkhole season. For another 4 or 5 months after that, then you have all the news reports of the house where the ground just opens up, whoop, swallows the house. Why? Because as the water table adjusts, right? But here's the thing. If you fly over that area in an airplane, you can see thousands of sinkholes. They're in people's backyards, you know. Thousands of them. Little lakes, sinkhole, little lake, sinkhole, little lake, sinkhole. And they're trying to negotiate, building their houses between the sinkholes and between the lakes and all that. And then every year it's flood and sinkholes. And we have more sinkholes here in Florida than almost anywhere else in the whole world that swallow houses and do stuff like that. Okay? But yet people build on those properties. Magical thinking. Laws of nature. Nature is going to be nature. And the biggest challenge that we have in health and preventative health is, first of all, establishing what is natural. You know, baseline of what is nature. What is normally healthy for human beings? What is normally healthy? What is nominally healthy? That means functionally healthy. What works as far as maintaining health, okay? In a natural way. In a natural way. And then, looking at where we're at as far as deviation from that, and however much we deviate from the natural, nominal, healthy way of being, that is actually an indication of our risk factor for disease and illness. Now I'm talking about a couple of things. One is classic Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, for example, we're taught to learn what is our natural, normal, healthy way of being for the type of human being that we are. And in Ayurveda it says there are different types of human beings. Different types of human beings. And they're broadly categorized into 3 classifications called Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, depending on the elemental composition of the human being. So, are you really airy-fairy? Because if you really are airy-fairy, then that's your norm, and you need to maintain your airy-fairiness in a harmonious fashion. Are you steamy? Are you walking steamy wonder? Not Stevie Wonder, but steamy wonder. Are you steamy? Which is Pitta, because it's fire and water. See, that's what happens when you mix fire and water. You get steam, right? So are you steamy, right? Or are you luscious? You know? Water and earth. See, when I think kapha, I don't think fat. A lot of people think kapha means fat. It does not mean that. It means chocolate. Think of it, because chocolate, it has this, is luscious. Chocolate is both a liquid and a solid, just simply depending on where it's at. In other words, ambient temperature. If it's a little warm, it's liquid. If it's a little cool, it's totally solid. If it's really cool, it's hard as rock. You could chip a tooth. Get that chocolate out of the refrigerator the way you like it and just get into it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh no, that was too hard. Probably should let that thaw out a little bit, you know? But chocolate is kapha. See, I like more positive association. A lot of people, we have what we call dosha bias in the yoga community, okay? Where every model on every issue of Yoga Journal ever published, maybe with one exception, was Vata body type. You never see the pittas and the kappas on the cover of Yoga Journal. So most people and you look at Instagram posts, 99.9% of the Instagram posts of yogis doing their look what I can do poses are Vata. You don't see the pittas and you don't see the kapha yogis, as if there aren't any. As if there aren't any. That's what I mean by bias. But the reason why I mentioned this idea of the doshas in Ayurveda is because the first step in determining a baseline for what I need to do to be healthy is to know what kind of animal I am. Okay? And then once I know that, then I can place myself in an ecosystem. And as I place myself in an ecosystem, then I'm going to have the things that make me thrive and healthy and happy and able to do all the things that my animal type is supposed to be good at, and avoid the things that are not good for me. So for example, if you transport a Javanese or a Sumatran Bengal tiger from a jungle in northern Thailand or Burma or Cambodia to the Sahara Desert and drop it in the middle of the Sahara Desert and come back in a couple of months, it's probably going to be dead. It's going to be a dried up version of that Sumatran tiger. Why? Because even though that is one of the most powerful animals on the face of the earth, literally one of the most strongest, fastest, most powerful, and super intelligent, right? I mean, you can go off the scale. Sumatran Bengal tiger is one of the wonders of the world as far as a creature in the wild, right? But you take that creature, that amazing, powerful creature, and you put it in the wrong environment, you put it in the wrong ecosystem, an ecosystem that's contrary to its naturalness, to its nature, and very, very quickly it will get sick and die. Very quickly. Either the environment will get it, or predation of other creatures, including bacteria, will get it, because, you know, there's bacteria that you like and bacteria you don't. Or let's say it another way. You don't really get to say. There's bacteria that likes you and bacteria that doesn't. Okay? Because you are also an ecosystem. We are all individually an ecosystem walking around. So we have the creatures that like us and so on, the habitation of us. But see, the thing is because we don't know what is normally, naturally healthy for us, and in one way, no fault of our own, okay? In one way, no fault of our own, because it's like I used to say, and maybe sometimes I still say, one of the reasons that sometimes I'm a little rough around the edges, quote unquote, you can quote me on that, is because I was raised by wolves in a bad place. And so because I was raised by wolves in a bad place, sometimes if there's an appropriate trigger in the environment, I act a little wolfy. I act a little bad. As an inclination, as far as a way of being. I've struggled against that literally my whole entire adult life. But it's not over, because it's ingrained in me. There's certain levels of ignorance. There's certain levels of inappropriate ways of being that are so ingrained in me that if I'm not paying attention, I might mistake them for being correct. I might mistake them for being appropriate. And some of these things has to do with my health. The level of information that I was raised with from child until I was age of majority, we would say, okay, regarding what is good for a person to eat and what is good for a person not to eat, for example. It's completely ignorant. So ignorant, in fact, that if I followed my family's proscripted diet, I wouldn't even live to be the age I am, because I'm the oldest lived man in my family's history in the last 100 years. There's no man in my family older than me who's ever lived to be older than me, except who directly related. I've got stepfather, step-grandfather, my adoptive father, and so on, who actually did, like I'll tell you, Floyd was in his 90s when he passed away. But he was not my biological father. My biological father died right after he turned 60. His father died in his 40s. My biologic grandfather didn't live to be 50. Okay? And they had a favorite diet in the family. We had our favorite family foods, our family dinners, our family ways of eating, and so on. And mostly our family tradition was based on the barbecue. Our family tradition of food was based on the barbecue. So all family dinners, if there was any way to make it so, were some variation of a barbecued carcass of an animal with a side vegetable, which sometimes nobody ate. And the variety of side vegetables I could count on one hand for 90% of the year. And on holidays, let's get the other hand in and we'll add a couple of others. Okay? So we would have macaroni and cheese with some meat. Doesn't matter what the animal. My dad was a hunter, so the meat could be anything. It could be deer, it could be turkey. I grew up eating squirrel. Okay, rabbit, squirrel, deer, turkey, dove, anything that he could kill and be technically legal was subject to be on the dinner table. We were poor, so my dad supplemented our food with hunting. And that's my first lessons of being with my dad, is being out in the woods and learning how to hunt and how to track. And even to this day, I haven't hunted in 20 years, and I'd be an excellent tracker and an excellent hunter. Why? Because I started when I was 5 years old in the woods, learning how to follow a game trail, learning how to listen, learning how to walk quietly. See, my dad was Native American. And so his whole thing was, to be a man, you have to know how to walk in the woods and how to kill things. Because ultimately, he was raised on, well, that's how you eat. If you don't know how to kill things, your family's going to starve. Even though those days are long past. The days of, if you don't hunt, your family's going to starve. Not functional. And then we would cook that meat to death and have a little side vegetable, and then that's what we would eat. We ate fatty. The more the better. Because that's where the flavor is, right? You ever hear that? The reason why we eat the fatty food and eat the fat is because that's where the flavor is. Well, it's actually true. That's not a myth. But see, that's part of the mythology of magical thinking, was that if it tastes good, it's good for you. Where actually, If you skip a generation and go back to your great-grandparents, right? So forget your parents. They're lost. They're influenced by 20th century gobbledygook. Misinformation based on promotion and marketing since the 1920s and 1930s. So it's like you don't think that this is all new. This idea of mass marketing of garbage to people and the masquerading as food and nutrients and so on and so forth. That's from the late 1920s and then 1930s, 1940s, and then full scale after the Second World War. So that's your parents, that's your grandparents, forget them. That's why they were ignorant, and that's why they taught you things like, if you're sick, go to a doctor. Because if you go back to your great-grandparents, that was not a choice. That was reasonable or possible for most people. Most illnesses had to be treated at home, either directly among the family members, some of whom might have been very well trained, because they had to be, somebody had to be, or your neighbors, and you were absolutely dependent on your neighbors who knew more about medicine than you did. And then the other thing that happens is if you look at food, for example, I have copies of cookbooks from the early 1800s and 1700s. And there's no sugar in recipes. There's no sugar in recipes. There's almost no salt in recipes. Salt was considered really expensive, really valuable. Wars were fought over salt in the past. Okay? The whole liberation and independence of India is over salt. Most people don't know that the last big war in India with the British and the Indians was about salt, because the British banned Indians from having access to the salt in India because they were exporting it to all the rest of the world as a commodity. And the last big protest that Mahatma Gandhi led was called the Salt March. It was called the Salt March. It was about salt, which was considered a commodity. Now salt's everywhere, isn't it? So who won? I think the British won. India got independence, but my point is, you go back to your great-grandparents' generation, and one of the things that you find out, and I found this out with Native Americans too, is Native Americans, by and large, ate very little meat. Very little. The percentage of meat that Native Americans ate, like you would think that they were out hunting every day and doing all that. Do you know, unless you've been hunting, really, logistically, it's a lot of work to hunt. You got your gear. Certainly back in the day, my father Floyd was one of the last great masters of flint knapping in the Crow tribe. He could take a rock the size of your fist, okay, and take a choice. You want an arrowhead for hunting buffalo, deer, or fish. The ones for fish are really small. I'm so happy I still have some of these. But he could take a rock, literally the size of your fist, and he put a piece of leather over his leg and an elk bone from an elk that he had killed himself and taken the horn off the elk, which he had then shaped into a little bit of a chisel, okay? And he could take a rock round as big as your fist and go bang, 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 and then in about 10 minutes have a razor sharp arrowhead about this big, perfectly formed, that he could tie to a stick to make an arrow. And he used to do that just for fun. He said he used to do it because he had to do it. When he was a child, he made the arrowheads for his father. That was one of his jobs, was making arrowheads for his father. Okay? And he did that all through his life. Just as kind of a meditation, if you will. It's like a hobby. I watched him make arrowheads quite a few times. Okay? But there's a lot of work, a lot of accoutrement. And then you got to get to where you're going. You got to have food to go hunting. Can't go without food because maybe you're going to be gone 2 or 3 days, okay? And then you got to, I don't know if you've ever seen a buffalo in real life, for example, okay? It's as big as Bonnie's car. Buffaloes, in fact, if they ran into each other, the buffalo would win. Okay? And a buffalo can go from a standing start eating grass, head down, eating grass, to 58 miles an hour in 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Which means if the buffalo's standing here, and you're standing all the way over on the other side of the classroom, that's 36 feet, okay? Buffalo's head down eating grass. And you're standing there on, let's say you're on this side of your car, parked on the side of the road. Before you can run around your car to the other side, that buffalo can nail you against your car. From a standing start, eating grass. Every year, about 12 people are killed in Yellowstone every year because they get out of their car and walk around to take a picture of a buffalo in the road, and one of those buffaloes at the wrong time of year just runs them over and kills them. Every year. You can look it up. Don't take my word for it. It's a crazy-ass statistic. Okay? So now you're going to go hunt buffalo, right? This is risky business. Do it wrong, somebody dies. If somebody dies every time you go hunting, pretty soon there's nobody left to go hunting, is there? So the only time they would go hunting is if they had to, because of the risk of death. Logistics, getting all your stuff together, time to go, distance to travel. And if everything goes well, risk of death. And then you got 2,000 pounds of carcass to deal with, which you have to carry back the 3 days that it took you to get to where you're hunting. You have to now carry that back. And every part of the animal is used. Nothing is left. Every part. It's not like they just take the steak and run. It's not fast food. Because everything's useful. The hide is useful. The tendons in the back of the knees of the buffalo are useful. Right? So, what did they eat? They mostly ate vegetables. Seasonal, appropriate, grass, nuts, wild grass, wild rices, vegetables and fruits, wild greens, which are abundant in nature. And here's something I want to say. Almost all of them, even some of the fruits, okay, are bitter. They're not sweet. Now, if you're really used to eating bitter greens, then you can get a bite of some sheep sorrel and the sheep sorrel will taste sweet. Right? So if you've been eating a lot, like if you eat a big fistful of dandelions, and then you take a handful of sheep sorrel, which we have both out here, so you could do this as an experiment for yourself. And then you take a handful of sheep sorrel and you bite the sheep sorrel is sweet. Okay? And then you get a handful of watercress. How many people have had fresh watercress? Okay? Fresh watercress out of a stream, okay, will bite you back. In other words, you bite the watercress bites you right back. Sort of like wasabi, right? Radish. Real radish, wild radish, it's really good for you, but you bite it bites you back. So the natural greens mostly are bitter. They're not sweet. They get some bit sweeter when you cook them in certain ways, or you process them in certain ways. Just like kale is bitter until you render it down a little bit and then throw some vinegar on it, like some balsamic, and all of a sudden the kale goes, oh. It's not bitter anymore, right? Dandelion, same way. Okay? But vinegar is bitter. See? So it's like you add a bitter thing to the bitter thing and then it makes it a little sweeter. It's like that's chemistry of cooking and science of cooking. But most natives ate plants. There was a plant-based diet. Indigenous traditional societies had plant-based diet. When I first went to Thailand and lived at Puthai Sawan in Nong Kham, Thailand, which is 2.5 hours from Bangkok, on a little orange bus with no air conditioning, that you would die before you got there, okay? Because if it was 115 degrees outside, it would be 140 inside the bus, okay? Sweating bullets. But we would eat communally, okay? And so the first phrase I was taught in Thai, which I remember, probably the first phrase I learned was where's the bathroom? But I don't remember that as the first phrase I learned. The first phrase I learned was, are you hungry? Do you want to eat? Where's the food? Ging Kao La. Ging Kao La, where's the food? You know, but to say eat in Thai literally means to eat rice. Gen, eat, cow, rice. So all eating process is a process basically one way or the other of how are you going to consume the rice. Are you going to eat the rice boiled? Are you going to eat the rice? My favorite, by the way, which I actually make here. I make katom in Thai, which in some areas of Thailand is also called jok or kanji. Okay, which is made from broken rice that you boil to make a porridge. And so it's really, in one way, we would think it's like food for babies. It's so easily digestible and easy to eat and so on. But actually, it is my favorite food. It's one of my most favorite foods is kanji in some form or another. It's always rice with something. And it could just be a little fish sauce. It could just be a little, it doesn't have to be fish sauce. Like Maggi is not fish sauce. Maggi is actually made from wheat. Okay? But it could be soy sauce. It could be, you know, it could just be a little handful of chives or a handful of cilantro. Okay? Or something, or basil. Just with the rice. It's literally that simple. Okay? Or with a little dried fish. When I first moved to Puthai Sawan, we would have rice, and the most common meat protein that we would have in any given day was dried fish. Because there was no refrigerator in the school. The school did not own a refrigerator when I first moved there. And the kitchen every day fed 20, 30, 40 people every day. And there was no kitchen. So everything was either dried or fermented. Dried or fermented. And actually, that means that even like, you know, dried fish, you might think it's disgusting. I'm going to tell you, you need to let that go. Okay? If you eat fish at all, dried fish is a good way to go because it is also fermented. As part of the process of drying the fish, bacteria grow on the fish. And they become part of the fish as it completely dries. It doesn't matter what the fish is, brim or squid or snakehead, or it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And Native Americans dried fish. On the East Coast and so on, we did trout and bass and pike and muskie lunch, which is kind of daunting. If you ever see a muskie or see a picture of a muskie, you're going to have a chill, because they're kind of a scary fish. They're the American equivalent of the giant naga or snakehead fish of the Mekong River. They're the American. It's just a big toothy fish. It's got lots of teeth. Like you think a barracuda looks scary, where do you see a muskie? All right, and that's a Native American fish. They're almost extinct. And they're very heavily regulated on the fishing now because they've been overfished. Because however scary they are, they're sweet as pie. The meat is, it's the sweetest, it's sweeter than any other fish you've ever had. And it's the size of a giant salmon, of a coho salmon. Okay? But we ate dried fish. Dried fish ferment. So that means when you consume dried fish, it has probiotics. It has healthy bacteria. But the percentage was, if we had a bowl of rice this big around, okay, the amount of fish that would be served to the whole group would just be a couple of fish. It wouldn't be some big pile of fish like this, like everybody gets their own fish. That's ridiculous. Sometimes there'd just be one fish on the table. And there's 10 people sitting around the table, and everybody just gets a little piece of that one fish and puts it on their rice. And then eats a little bit of rice with the little bit of fish. And then eats more rice because the rice around where that little bit of fish was is now flavored. So you don't need to keep putting a big chunk of fish on your rice every time you want to bite. You just kind of dip it on there and then you just eat. And mostly what you would eat is rice and vegetables. And other vegetables that we would eat a lot of, like the cilantro, we'd eat the basil. We have basil every meal. Royal basil, Thai basil's the best. Oh my God, I love Thai basil. But we had Thai basil every meal. We had mint every meal. We had lemongrass every meal. Now, we had ginger that we grew every meal. All right. Do you know every one of those plants I just mentioned is a medicine also? Antibiotic, antiviral, antitumetic, anti-inflammatory, every one of them. Native Americans ate grass and roots and tubers, wild rices, wild grains, and fruits in season. And there's actually a really wide variety of fruits that grow depending on the season if you know where to look for them. But they're not all sweet. So for example, even here, we have wild strawberries. So you see a wild strawberry and you pluck one up, and you go, ooh, a strawberry. And you pluck one up and you eat it, it tastes like a strawberry, but bitter. They're not sweet. Okay? Further out west, on the banks of streams and rivers and so on, you find bracken and what are called choke cherries. And these little bushes that grow about this high that have these little red berries on them. And those berries are just, what you do is you collect them and you either eat them raw, you mash them up in a mortar and pestle and mix them with other stuff, or you can render them like a jam. Chokecherry jam is to die for. Okay? But chokecherries are not sweet. But it's a funny thing. If you don't eat sweet, if you don't eat sugar, and you get a chokecherry, the first bite, you'll get this like stabby pain in your jaw, right here, the first bite. And then your brain will go, second thought will be bitter, right? And then about a second later, you get this sweetness. Okay? You don't get the sweet first. You get this almost like, ow, this thing right here, because of the citric acid that's in the chokecherry. Same thing with eating rose hips. Native Americans ate rose hips. Wild roses grow everywhere in North America, even in Florida. Wild roses. The hips of the rose, okay, pre-bud, pre-flower, all that stuff, they're edible. They taste like rose, a little bit citrusy, and a really sharp, stabby sour. And Native Americans here collected them like crazy and ate them like crazy. And of course, since they have naturally occurring ascorbic acid, okay, they are useful in all metabolic process, but specifically very strongly appropriate, for example, in wound healing and resisting infections. And so the plant-based diet, the natural, indigenous. So back to Puthai Sawan. So I lost 40 pounds in the first 5 weeks I was at the school. I lost 10 pounds a week. when I moved into Puthai Sawan. Within a month, none of my clothes fit. And I ate continuously. I was ravenously hungry all the time. It was hot, and we were working out, and we were training, and not in air condition. And after I got over my initial tiredness, because first going into that environment, I felt a lot of fatigue. But I would eat what everybody else ate, and we had rice soup in the morning, which the Thais call jok is watery congee. It's like congee, but it's got more water. Okay, so more soupy. Okay, congee I actually like better because it's more like a porridge, like Three Bears style. It's more like a porridge, right? So, and then we would have dried fish and rice for lunch. Okay, and then we would have a little meal before 6 o'clock, and then we didn't eat after 6 at all. After 6 in the day, we didn't eat at all. And so that meant we were fasting from 6 o'clock on one day until about 6 o'clock the next morning. So it's 12 hours a day we did not eat. We could drink water, or tea. We had tea, but we didn't eat. And the reason why was because Pakru was a monk forever. And even though he wasn't a monk anymore, and even though some of the other teachers were not monks anymore, they had given up being a monk so that they could have sex with girls and make babies and have life that way, which is legal, okay? It's not a character flaw, okay? They still followed patterns of life that they had learned since they were children as being monks. And so they would not eat unless they prayed over their food. That was number one. We never had a meal where we didn't do puja and waikru or do a mantra before we had the food. Never. Not once, ever. I don't recall ever one single time. Never doing that. And number two, we never ate after 6 o'clock because the monks don't eat after 6 o'clock, after sundown. They say sundown, but now Thais have watches, monks have watches. So they just run things by the clock. Evening meditation is at 6 o'clock. You don't eat after the evening meditation. Okay? And so that meant we were fasting half a day. And then one day a week, we just didn't eat. One day a week, like Sunday, you'd say Sunday, we didn't eat anything. So we fasted one day a week. So we fasted half a day every day, and we fasted one day a week, and we ate mostly vegetables with a little bit of meat. Like, let's take a chicken. Like, one of my favorite things was Thai fried chicken. Like, you think Kentucky Fried Chicken is good? Oh my God. If you like chicken, if you get a chicken that's marinated in some lemongrass and some ginger and some fish sauce and then fried properly, you'll throw the Kentucky Fried right out the window. It's flavorless compared to that, especially with chilies. Like, my favorite was they did at Puthai Sawan. They did a chicken that they marinated up with lemongrass and ginger and fish sauce and a handful of chili peppers as big as my hand right here. Chopped up really fine. They'd massage that all into the chicken, let it sit for an hour, and then they would grill it over charcoal. And somebody would have to stand there with a stick to keep me away from it until it was done. Every once in a while, just kind of smack at me to get, back off, dude, that's for everybody. And the first couple of times they would serve this chicken, I would grab the whole chicken or half of it and put it on my plate. Somebody would smack me and put it back and say, that's for everyone. I'm like, what? I thought, what? In my house, see, every person in the room would get half a chicken. Really, if there were 8 people, we certainly would eat 4 or 5 chickens. Easily. And I never ate less than half a chicken. What's the point? Otherwise, what's the point? I can eat a whole 5-piece Kentucky Fried, no problem. Wash it down with a little coleslaw to keep the pipes clear. Skip the biscuit. That's scam promotion. Okay? And besides, the biscuit takes up space the chicken could be in. So that's why I don't eat the biscuit. Not because I don't like biscuits. It's just a waste of time. So I had this mentality at Putai Sawan. They bring the chicken out, and I'd go for it, man. Because in my house, if you didn't go for it, maybe you didn't get any. Because everybody would load their plate up as fast as possible with as much food as they could eat. That's the way I was raised to eat. You have a plate, as soon as the food hits the table, you get in there and get your piece. Right? Just don't get that last piece of chicken, because then that's when my dad would hit you with a spoon. Because in my family, the last piece of chicken on the plate was for my dad, period, the end, on penalty of death. If you grab the last piece of chicken, you would be stabbed. So I go to Putai Sawan, I'm in the Buddhist school, and they're served a meal, and I do exactly the same. I load up my plate. And my teacher goes, "What are you doing?" I was like, well, I'm just, eating. Isn't that what we're here for? You said it was dinner time. Isn't that what we're, I'm sorry, what was the question? He goes, "No, all of that chicken is for everyone. You get a piece like this, like they would take the chicken, see, like the way we did it is we either cut the chicken in half, or we just separate the thigh and the leg, and then the breast would be one piece, that kind of thing. No. What the Thais would do is they take that little, and not even a big chicken either, it's a little chicken, because the chickens are feral, okay? They're wild, and they're stringy, and they're small, and they're really flavorful. They take that one little chicken, and pardon me if you're a vegetarian, I'm grossing you out, but it makes the point. They take the chicken, they put it on the tamarind cutting board, which is a cross-section from a tamarind tree, because it's naturally antibiotic. All right? And they would just go with a big Chinese knife, bang, 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 and then they turn that chicken and go, bang, 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 bang. And so the whole chicken suddenly becomes all these little pieces about this big. Right? And then what you were supposed to do is you get some rice, and then get one of those. And maybe dip it in some nampla or some fish sauce or whatever, and then put it on your rice so that some of that juiciness gets on the rice, and then you eat it. And then when you're done with that, maybe you get another one. But really, there's other things too, mostly vegetables. My favorite being a wild plant in Thai called pak boom. Oh, I'm addicted to pak boom. I could literally eat my weight in pak boom, and do. Like this last trip in Thailand, every day, if I could have pak boom, every day I had pak boom. I had it in different ways. All right, but we say it's a wild morning glory. It's a plant that grows on the edge of the rice fields. Okay, and it's sort of a cross between spinach and broccoli. It's hollow. And it's leafy like a spinach, but it's got texture and density of flavor more like a broccoli, but it's neither. They call it a morning glory, but I don't get that because it's not a vine. But anyway, super, super good, right? But wild. So we would have the pak boom, we'd have mint, we would have, okay, but the percentage of fish, or chicken, for example, or pork, if there were 10 people eating at that table, and we had several tables because there was always 20, 30 people that were eating together, for every 10 people it would be one chicken. Sometimes less than that. And sometimes it would just be one fish on the table. And what you did is they chopped it up and cut it, and you just would get a piece of that fish and put it on your rice. Okay? And then we had chilies with every meal in 5 different ways. We had chilies in vinegar, white vinegar, chilies in dark vinegar, chilies in soy sauce, just chilies with chilies, dried chilies, fresh cut dried chilies and old chilies, like roasted, fermented old chilies. We had chilies like 5 different ways. And it's really interesting when you're eating a big meal and you start putting chilies on the food, you don't eat as much. Go figure. Chilies will make you hungry, but chilies will also control what's called satience with eating, which is the place where you're eating where you feel full. This is why in indigenous cultures, Native Americans ate chilies. All through Mesoamerica, you want to talk about, like, you know, the blue dye that the Aztecs and the Mayans used in their sacred rituals in their temples in Chichen Itza and in Central America and so on. They say in the Well of Souls in Chichen Itza is 5 feet thick of blue clay that was accumulated over 1,000 years of the Mayans doing ceremony there. And every bit, every ounce, every speck of that blue clay, which is found all the way to Argentina, and the Aztecs used it, and the Olmecs used it, and the Incas used it. It's in Teotihuacan, in the Pyramid of the Sun, the Jaguar Pyramid, which is down and to the right of the Pyramid of the Sun, which is painted with these beautiful frescoes. The blue dye that's used on those frescoes comes from Jasper, Georgia. All of it comes from Jasper, Georgia. North of Florida. They had to come through Florida to get to Jasper, going to Etowah. And the Etowah Indians traded that blue clay, which they mined, for chilies. For 1,000 years. What's the most valuable thing you have? What's the most valuable thing you have? Well, I've got blue clay that makes an excellent paint. Well, I got chilies. Okay. That sounds fair. Let's do it. Okay? Chilies, we know, are anti-cancer, anti-tumetic, anti-inflammation, antiviral, antibacterial. We know that they have catechins and other VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and so on, that enhance eyesight, reduce inclination for diseases like glaucoma and diabetes and cancers, and we know that. And so the native and the natural diets were based on what keeps people alive the longest with the least external intervention. And that's true everywhere in the world. That's why we say indigenous traditional medicine, we share and we value and we want to promote, we want to learn about it. And I don't care where it comes from. I don't care if it comes from Africa. I don't care if it comes from South Asia. I don't care if it comes from South America. I don't care. Why? Because the indigenous traditional diets were based on what keeps people alive the longest, what keeps people disease-free the longest, with the least necessity for external intervention. And then only as we civilize and become civilized do we deviate from the indigenous diet. And as we deviate from the indigenous diet, guess what happens? We start to get sick. And we start to get sick in crazy creative ways. And now we're in a situation where the average person has no idea what a natural diet is or should be for them. None. There are many people that you know, who don't eat unnatural food, ever. Maybe by accident. Everything they eat is processed. Everything they eat is adulterated. Everything they eat might have GMO. Everything they eat, even the sugar, maybe that sugar comes from GMO beets, which is the widest source of natural sugar. You talk about Domino Sugar and companies like that. The bulk of their sugar is not from sugar cane. Here in Florida it is, because sugar cane grows here. But by the way, sugar cane is one of the plants that has the heaviest use of pesticides, Roundup, glyphosate. And it's wreaking havoc in the Everglades, and it's a big problem right now for this whole red tide thing. You know, the one thing that they don't want to keep emphasizing, that they don't want to keep talking about, is the primary reason for this growth of the red tide and so on is agricultural runoff from the sugarcane plantations, and it's a side effect of the massive intervention of glyphosate into the aqua systems. And see, they don't want to talk about that because it would mean, first, it's a daisy chain. First, you got the biggest corporation in the States, Domino Sugar, and then Monsanto, which is now Bayer. Okay, because Bayer bought Monsanto. So, GMO sugar from sugar beet, GMO sugar from corn. The single largest GMO crop in the United States is corn. Okay, 90%, over 90% of all corn grown in the United States is GMO. So it is, in my opinion, adulterated, contaminated. Those are the words that I use to describe GMOs. Okay? And then we have the medical system, which is to treat the plethora of diseases, 90% or more of which, and I'm being conservative, I think at 90%, are all preventable or would have been preventable with simply a different dietary emphasis that stressed natural, appropriate, uncontaminated, unprocessed food that was primarily plant-based. And see, the problem I have with even primarily plant-based, first of all, let me say this. There is no science that proves that a vegan diet will make you live one day longer. There's actually no science. There are no long-term clinical studies that prove that a vegan diet will have you to live one day longer than you would as a non-vegan. Okay? We don't know that 100% vegetarian, there's no studies that show 100% vegetarian will have you to live one day longer than if you are not 100% vegetarian. Where the clinical trials come in, like the China study, and that's a good one to write down, by the way, because you can get the T. Collins book that he wrote about the China study, and you can read that yourself. That was the largest, longest controlled nutritional study, scientific study ever done in the history of the world, which was done in China. And this is one of the studies where they show the problems with the modern diet. Because again, even in China, as China has economically developed, the average diet of average Chinese people has changed dramatically. I'll give you an example. For example, in my friend Mark, his family is Chinese. Mark's mother is exactly 4 foot tall. Mark's mother, grandma, she's exactly 4 foot tall. Okay, Mark is 5 foot. He's a foot taller than his mother. Mark's son is 6'3". When I first went to Thailand, the average height of the average Thai male at 14 years old, okay, was 4'10" to 5 foot. 4'10" to 5 foot. 4 foot something. The average height of the average Thai at 14 is a foot taller than that now. Just in one generation. It's because of change in diet. Now, I'm not saying that's bad that they're taller. That's not bad. Okay? However, as they've gotten taller, guess what? They now have diabetes in Thailand. When I first went to Thailand, there was no such thing. There was no regular treatment available for diabetes because there wasn't any. It was virtually impossible to get insulin, and there was no mechanism to get insulin. Why? Insulin has to be refrigerated. And there was no refrigeration. So how do I know that nobody was doing insulin for diabetes? Is because I was in areas where there wasn't a refrigerator in half the city. And it wasn't filled with insulin. It was filled with ice cream. Magnums. That was the first ice cream I ever saw in Thailand, was Magnums. Yeah. So the thing about it is, this idea of the plant-based diet is mostly true but not 100% provable scientifically. But here's where we have a big question though. If you're going to have any percentage of meat protein in your diet, now you have the question of what's the provenance of that meat protein. In other words, if it's beef, for example, is that beef treated with GBH? Is that beef steroidal? Is it filled with antibiotics? How is that? Where does it come from? How is it processed? Because even if I was going to say I only eat 5% meat protein, because it's not scientific for me to completely eliminate meat, so I'm going to just have 5% or 10%. Where does that come from? Because if it's contaminated, even though it wouldn't be scientific for me to not eat it, from the point of view of plant to meat protein ratio, I would still need to be a vegetarian because I can't guarantee that the meat I'm eating is not contaminated and pose an actual risk, right? And then we do have a problem because there are different body types. And although in Ayurveda we say Vata, Pitta, Kapha, there are actually, though, 3 subtypes of each of those. They're called gunas. Okay? So there are 3 subtypes. It's not like all humanity is divisible by 3 body types. 9 is a better number. 9 different types is a much better number. Okay? Gives you more nuance. Right? But the problem is some of those types need to eat more meat protein. They're built for it. They're made for it. By blood type, literally, another way of saying is that every different blood type is actually a different animal. Literally a different species. One of the ways we can tell is the different species of human beings is because there are different blood types in human beings. And this goes all the way back to when Homo sapiens were partying with Neanderthals.